moving on from the last post. In the last 7 years, what I was working towards was an art exhibition. So the art exhibition I was working on was several. There was one based on my own works. Then I wanted to look at doing something for my great uncle Fred. So I actually have some of his slides here. First, I'm going to get onto it with my work. So I grew up in Sydney, and I grew up very much as a train-based person. So when I was studying at art school, I call it art school. It's TAFE College in Newcastle, but it was actually the Art Annex is what it was called. So it used to have a nickname, it was called Art School or the Art Annex in Hunter Street there in Newcastle. And that's because it only really specialised in art or design work. There was nothing else there except for artists. It was very creative. I started studying there in 1996. In that time, I was living at my dad's at Empire Bay. It was closer to me. So, it was more, sort of me living in Sydney, because there was some classes had to be taken in Sydney. Dad was sort of in the middle. So dad's at Empire Bay, 40 odd minutes from the city of Sydney, and I would either go to school on the train, go in one direction to Newcastle, get off at Civic Station, or the other direction to Sydney, and I'll be getting off at Central, changing for St James, and then going up to the art galleries there from St James and so forth. So without further ado, I actually did a lot of artwork. Now this is some of my photography work from 1996. I did a series of traveling on trains. This is actually taken from one of the train stations I was on, and this is my 1996 work. I'm only going to touch really briefly on it. 1996 work. I've actually got some great ones of the old Rattler trains, 1996 work. This one is actually at, it's called Redhead Beach, I think, in Newcastle. This guy here, he was actually in the class that I was in. That's Chris. So there's that. Oh, and actually also adding we've worked my artwork. So growing up, been born and raised in Sydney. I'm actually born and raised in the suburbs of Sydney, but my family actually are originally from the city. So, for example, my grandmother Lola, she's from Piper Street, Leichhardt. Now, 43 Piper Street, Leichhardt. Nan told me they moved into that house around the late 1930s. She said it was her uncle's house so he owned it, but he was overseas, like he was over in Europe. So his sister actually lived in there. And all the family, so I don't know how it worked, but anyway, but basically it was Mary and Arthur, my great-grandmother and great-grandfather, they raised their family in that house in 43 Piper Street, Leichhardt. Lola, May, my grandmother was one of them, Mari, her sister, Brian, another one, little Brian still lives in the area, so little Brian, we call him little Brian Jr., which is my dad's, my Nan's brother's son. He was a police officer in the police force in Sydney, and he still lives in that area. He remembers the house in Leichhardt well. He actually remembers Uncle Fred's darkroom and Uncle Fred developing the photography work. Look, so do I. I was very close to my Uncle Fred. We call him Uncle Fred in the family, and this is all going to be part of the art exhibition I was putting together. And I've been working on this for so many years, which is why it's very heartbreaking that what happened in the last 7 years happened, because I was almost working towards that. So with Uncle Fred, his real name is Leo Patrick Sayer, because Julia Sayer, which is my great-grandmother's mother, Julia Sayer, adopted him. She adopted him from her sister May, which we always called Mad Auntie May in the family, May Goff. So Fred's original name was Frederick Goff, and Julie adopted him and became my great-grandmother's brother. That's how it is. I was close to Uncle Fred. I was close to my great-grandmother. Loved the house, 43 Piper Street, Leichhardt. My Nana Lola sold that in 1999. I used to sit across the road in the park of Leichhardt there, which is the park that allegedly, according to my mum's cousin Sharon Newcomb, that Sharon Newcomb's mother's Auntie Mari, Nan's sister, Auntie Mari used to keep a racehorse in that park growing up. So, and the viaducts for that park, my nan grew up playing in those viaducts. My mum, according to my nan, my mum grew up playing in those viaducts. I grew up playing in those viaducts. There's a lot of history of my family in the city of Sydney. Also up the road from that house, if you've got the house behind you, 43 Piper Street, Leichhardt, looking at the park in front of you, to the right, there was this big old mansion. It was a haunted house, and you'd be dared to go in it. I used to always go in it, playing it. It was empty for the longest period of time. So now it's an apartment building. has been since about the 90s. So with all this as well, and see my grandfather, he's from Balmain Roselle. My mum's actually born in St Margaret's Hospital in Darlinghurst there. So, and well, actually most of her siblings are, I think all of her siblings except for one of them is actually their dad's father's botany. As I said, dad's mother Ruby's born in Five Duck, but raised in the Drummoyne Abbotsford area. There I've got so all these addresses, and I actually, growing up around the city like that, like spending time, even though I'm from the suburbs, my life was very much city. I actually got, so there's some of the documents here to do with family. This is actually to do with my dad's father. I'm just going to jump off here because I've been combining all this into, and I utilised the family history and then turned it into artwork. This is actually a document to do with Edith Mabel Kavanagh, which is the lady who raised my grandfather Stanley Fleming. That's about the property there in, I probably can't see it, but look, anyway, that's about the property where she owned there in Botany Bay. And that's it there. The old, so it actually has a name there, Edith Kavanagh. That's the land that she had there in Botany Bay. All right, so, and here's actually, this is where I grew up. So, 12 Dunsmore Street, right here. All right. So, and I'll get into it. Here's actually one of Uncle Fred's photography work that he's developed. So he was actually all around the world, my great Uncle Fred, which is why some of his photography work is fantastic, including, what we've got here, the building of the Opera House. There we go. And that's going to show up good enough. But that is the Opera House there being built. Most of my belongings like this is in storage. So I actually want to get a curator to look at these, see if it's worthwhile to put into a photography book. I want Uncle Fred's legacy to live on. I also want to turn it into some artwork. I would like to do light installations and so forth. My Uncle Fred was an absolutely fantastic photographer. He lived a lot of time overseas in Europe. He was over in Europe before the war, during the war, because he was there when the war broke out. After the war, then spent the rest of his life in Sydney. Actually, this is Uncle Fred here. That's his car covered in snow. That is my great Uncle Fred just there, which I want to get this one. I love it. It's a fantastic, so I don't know where he was in Europe, but that is Uncle Fred. And I've actually got some great slides of the house in 43 Piper Street, Leichhardt, and it's Australiana. Like there's family photos of that little tiny courtyard out the back, and there was this little sort of tin shed that Uncle Fred used to make his own scotch in or whatever with one of those boilers. Whatever you call them. So like there's some great Australiana photos. Look, most of the stuff I've got of this is in storage. It is towards my art exhibition. I was working towards that, and unfortunately, so this is why I say in the previous video, this matter needs to be dealt with legally. I got my life interfered with, and by the legal system, it's illegal. It should be dealt with as a criminal matter, and there should be no further discussion about it. You don't get to break laws in someone else's life, and I won't accept it when I was studying and working my butt off the entire time. So the only time I actually had a really brief break, look, I left my relationship and had a brief break in 2015, and this is not really appropriate for my business page, but it does have to get out there because I had people say, well, what did you do? And I said, well, I actually had things that were going on, and I had to put everything on hold for 7 years. I had no choice but to stop everything completely for 7 years until I could get this sorted out. There's no other way but to say, okay, this whole matter needs to be dealt with legally. I have a right to be, I'm not even going to talk about reimbursement damages. I have a right to be able to press criminal charges against those who interfered in my life in the last 7 years. It was unwanted attention. It breaks so many laws, and it affected me in 2 countries. I hold a green card to the US that I've held since 2014. As a permanent resident to America. The interference actually went from Sydney to the US and back, and it was just ridiculous. And the whole time I'm saying, but this is wrong information about me. Can you please leave me alone? Because now you're causing me physical health damage. I've had to go, okay, I have to stop everything. I'm trying to work on my studies that I studied. For example, okay, I'm not talking about studies I've studied in the past, like 1996, I studied fine arts. 1997, I studied design fundamentals. I'm talking about when I went back and I studied, design at Emmore Design Centre, TAFE College, or it's Emmore Design Centre there. I studied there in 2009. So design, events and illustration, certificate 4. I just went through the first year of that. Excuse me. I was working in parts of design at that time. So I picked up like a work experience job doing design consultancy, but it was a bit more than that because, as you're going to see in other videos, I was actually utilising what I had learned in my design studies as drafting and so forth. And then I was actually designing one-off pieces of furniture, implementing them into a computer system, sending that off to a factory to make a one-off piece of design. I'm not really impressed with what's just gone on in the last 7 years. I want this matter to be heard legally. I'm reaching out because I've had a lot of people say to me in the last 7 years, we just want to help you. And I said, okay, then if you want to help me, I need a solicitor. Excuse me. The only thing I actually need help with is a solicitor because I was lied about. From those lies, this has now been the repercussion towards my life. So, without further ado on that, if anyone ever comes up to me and says, I'm just trying to help you, I didn't need your help. There was nothing wrong with my life until the deliberate invasion of privacy and some trouble was caused in the last 7 years. There was nothing wrong at all. I was a single bachelor man with what I worked hard for, my assets, my belongings, my savings, my rent subsidised apartment, my car, my perfect life and my dog. I don't understand what these idiots get coming up to me saying, we want to help you. I'm not looking for help in anything. I'm busy working on my studies. What is this ridiculous behaviour from people? So if you want to help me, I was lied about and I want those lies corrected. You can do that. You can find me a solicitor to take the matter further. So there's that. I'm going to discuss with the studies I did in 2009 and in 2010 and go from there. So I upload this one. They're going to be probably a bit choppy, the posts, but it's just basically display some of the works I've done. Most of my works is in storage. So you want to help me? I need to be settled back in a good sized apartment in the city. I'm a city guy, always have been. Like I said, lived most of my life in the city of Sydney. You're born in the suburbs, but I've lived in the city longer than that. I've lived in Rushcutters Bay for the longest period I've lived anywhere in my entire life. There in Rushcutters Bay and Surrey Hills. Surrey Hills, one of the longest periods I've lived in my entire life is been in Surrey Hills and Rushcutters Bay. There's actually nothing I've lived anywhere else. I haven't lived anywhere else longer than I've lived in Surrey Hills and Rushcutters Bay. So there you go. So I lived most of my life in the two areas. Surrey Hills and Rushcutters Bay has been the longest period I've lived anywhere in my entire life. So I'm going to explain some of the studies I did, interior decoration in 2010, 2009, design events illustration, and why I didn't go further with the fashion design that I got a credit for in the past. All this relates only to the last 7 years, and probably you could almost date it back to 2009 onwards and say, well, there's a lot of incorrect information here that I've actually said to certain organisations themselves, that information you've got on me is incorrect. That's not true. Can you correct it? To date, they haven't, even though over the last 7 years I've said it constantly, you need to correct that information. That's not true. That's inaccurate information. As per privacy laws in Australia, I've told you myself that information is incorrect. You have a legal right to correct it. They didn't correct it. Instead, an organisation kept harassing my life based with wrong information, incorrect information. They gathered it from unreliable sources. As I said, people that don't know me, they've gathered information from unreliable sources and they've attacked my life over this and have caused me damage. The only way that anyone can help me at the moment is I need a really good barrister. A really good barrister moving forward and get this matter resolved legally.